Welcome classic rock fans to another ranking, and today we're looking at the studio albums of David Gilmour. Just his studio albums. I'm not going to look at collaborations with bands like The Orb or Roy Harper, for example. If you're new to this channel, please do click like, subscribe, and do check that notification bell. It makes all the difference. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. Anyway, enough of this flim-flam, let's get on with it, shall we? Number 5 is Rattle That Lock from 2015. If there was any criticism to be made of Gilmour's solo material, especially his recent couple of albums, and even the last album by Pink Floyd, The Endless River, it would be that sometimes this music suffers from a confining quietness. I sometimes wish they would shake free of what one critic has described as their steadfast reserve. Rattle That Lock in part broke that spell, I think, and it's an interesting album thematically, looking at ageing and mortality. One can't help but imagine that the death of Richard Wright hasn't in some way inspired this, with the beautiful song A Boat Lies Waiting. But on this album, quite a few musical textures are explored. There's some jazz, there's a waltz, and even some quirky stuff, like, for example, Gilmour recording the I think it was the tannoy on a French railway station and incorporating that into the music. Perhaps a slight nod to his band's conviction to make music from everyday objects. There are some beautiful moments on this album. I love the Milton references, I love the jazzy textures of Girl in the Yellow Dress, but the best track is Faces of Stone, which, if I'm not mistaken, is about losing somebody to Alzheimer's, something that strikes quite deep for me as well. But also, of course, it does contain the aforementioned A Boat Lies Waiting, his eulogy to his fallen bandmate. Overall, it's an album that's okay, but it's just a little bit too sedate for me. Number 4 is About Face from 1984. Now, I know a lot of you will have put this at the bottom of the list, but I have a soft spot for this album. I remember seeing it on display in W.H. Smith's when it first came out, and running home from school that day to watch him perform on the tube. I love the collaboration with Pete Townsend. I like tracks like Murder, Cruise, Blue Light. These songs, they suffer from very 80s production values and sound rather dated, especially with the use of horns, I think. I would love this album to be remixed and reissued, quite frankly. Of course, this follows the last Pink Floyd album, or what was perceived to be, and that was The Final Cut, dubbed The Final Straw by Gilmour. Certainly his relations with Waters is critiqued on the wonderful You Know I'm Right, which is probably the finest song on the album in my opinion. As I said, this album does suffer from the era's mechanised production, and there's lots of certain 80s tropes on here that's seriously dated, hence my call for a remix. But there's an urgency to this album. He sounds like a man unleashed, especially with the opening track, Until We Sleep. And we also get All Lovers Are Deranged, where Gilmour drops his usual reserve, I think. This, in my opinion, is Gilmour's most underappreciated album. Number 3 is David Gilmour's new album, Luck and Strange, from 2024. Luck and Strange is Gilmour's 5th solo album, one he claims to be the best thing he's done since Dark Side of the Moon. Probably a comment there to rile old Rog, I guess. But credit where credit's due, there's some genuinely lovely moments on this album as he ponders on the greying reality of his own mortality. I genuinely enjoy the melancholic ache of this music, which is complemented by the mournful, plaintive tone of his daughter, Romany Gilmour, who duos with him on a couple of tracks. I find her to be a real highlight on this record. I'd love to see a solo album by her. I wonder if she writes songs, though. And we get the familiar Gilmour tropes on this album. His guitar soars away in that fluid, bluesy, proggy style we've all come to love so much. And the sound on this album is interesting. We must doff our cap to co-producer Charlie Andrews. Done a great job on this in corralling or guiding Gilmour away from the familiar. You could say with the Polly Sampson writing the lyrics and Romany Gilmour on the album, guiding him from the familiar to the familial, maybe. Nevertheless, a great job is done all round. I wouldn't say this was the best thing he's done since Dark Side of the Moon, but like a lot of Dave's stuff, it's a pleasant listening experience and a suitable addition to the Dave canon, one that doesn't really thunder or roar, but just kind of trundles along. And number 2 is On an Island from 2006. poet William Wordsworth said that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origins from emotion recollected in tranquility. And that sentiment seems to overarch this album with its cerulean textures and languid sentiments. You could certainly say this album has a languid gait and a meandering, drifting quality to it. Some critics who were quite harsh said it sounds like a pet project constructed by a semi-retired 60-something multi-millionaire. There's a plethora of talent on here. You've got David Crosby, Graham Nash, Phil Manzanera. All contribute to the musical nous of this record. It's at times tightly managed, yet also beguiling with its spacey, ethereal tones. Gilmour seems to tap into that very languid, early, almost bucolic persona, the chap that wrote Fat Old Son. I think it's a wonderful album. It's an interesting meditation on serenity, I think, in many respects. Despite what the critics said about it, I think one waggish critic said it's a wonderful advert for a slow death by drowning. It's an album that you can drift away on and it just lapse away. Really, you have to immerse yourself in it committedly to get everything out of it. But it's certainly worth investing in. It certainly recaptures the family holiday on that Greek island of Castellarizo with its dreamy tones and water imagery. And it's an album that, if I may quote classic rock, recaptures that cerulean placidity. I think it's a wider meditation on just being, I think. Number 1 is the eponymous debut album from 1978, David Gilmour. Number 1 for me will always be Gilmour's debut album from 1978. In between launching Kate Bush's career and coming to terms with Waters' Orwellian beast fable, he managed to knock this one out. It certainly feels like a breath of fresh air from what I would imagine were the claustrophobic confines of Pink Floyd at Britannia Row at this point. And there's some lovely instrumental stuff. Apparently there's some stuff brought over from his old band Bullet. Gilmour said this album was important to me in terms of self-respect. I needed to step out from behind Pink Floyd's shadow. Loose and collaborative, some wonderful musicianship on here. I believe Ian McLagan plays on it as well. And There's No Way Out of Here is such an incredible number. Fantastic, especially the you kind of wish you could hear more of the guitar solo. It didn't fade out at all. It's just absolutely gorgeous. This is certainly a varied album. From the sublime There's No Way Out of Here, from the vocal showcase of So Far Away, not to mention the driving Short and Sweet. One of my favourites on this album is the closer, I Can't Breathe Anymore. Now, if that isn't a comment on his working relationship with Waters within the confines of Pink Floyd, I don't know what is. So there you are, that's the ranking of Dave Gilmour's solo albums. Slightly different to how I ranked them before, because On an Island has lifted up in my estimation since I originally did the Pink Floyd solo albums ranking all those years ago. I know you've been watching a video by Classic Album Review. Please share this. Other than that, I'll just leave you with my closing salvo, which is, hope you're well, staying safe, and of course that you keep listening.